All right, so welcome to Godot. We've done a little tour of the workspace here, and as mentioned, we're going to create, and I may have reviewed this in the previous video, but let's get quickly back up to speed. I'm going to create myself a 2D scene, and I think I did this last here, but I'm going to call this level 1. Um, this is my root node, and it's really just a container. It's going to create level 1 and save that there. So at the moment, what I'm going to want to do is click Save Scene. And a scene is a collection of nodes, and you'll see why we've done this in a second here. Um, at the moment, there's only one of them, but I'm going to put a bunch of other ones in there later on. And I will save that, and you can see it appears down in the corner here as level 1 scene. Think of that like a file. In fact, if we were to open File Manager, we could go to our project here, and you see there's my level 1 scene file. And this just allows us to be able to build things, create them, keep them together, and keep them neat and organized. Now, next, I could add more things here, but for reasons you're going to see shortly, I actually want to make a brand new scene and put a player in it. So I'm going to click this to create a brand new scene, and I want to add some other nodes. Now, the first thing I'm going to create for my scene is a player. And that is not really one of these predetermined ones here, but it's an other node. So I want to click that, and you'll find that we've got hundreds and hundreds of different nodes, like different pieces of Lego that can click together to create the kind of game that we're looking for. Now, rather than searching through all of these, manually, we have a nice little search feature here, and I want to make a player. That's the first thing in my game, and a player is best represented by a character body 2D. And so if I start typing character, you'll see it filters out and pops them up. Now notice we've got red ones and blue ones. The red ones are all 3D, the blue ones are all 2D. So make sure you pick in the blue ones here. And there's a little description down below if it helps you figure out what nodes are best for what. This is a 2D physics body specialized for characters moved by a script. Hey, that sounds exactly the kind of thing I would like for a player, but also be useful for an enemy or a non-player character or a whole bunch of different things where we are getting to move and control these objects. So I'm going to create that. And it starts out as my root node, a character body 2D. This is a terrible name. You should be changing most of the names here to be more descriptive. In this case, it is the player that I would like to make. And you'll see that up comes, well, first of all, you'll see that I don't really see any difference here. I don't see the player that I just created. But believe it or not, it is there. If I hover my mouse over top, you can see player. But player has no size, shape, dimensions. It doesn't know anything about player. It's just an idea of a player here. And you'll find a little warning here, this node configuration warning. It says it has no shape, so it can't collide or interact with other objects. So that's one of the first things we want to do is give it a shape, but the question is, what shape should I give it? Well, you could add the shape right away, but I like to actually see my thing first before I figure out what shape it's going to be so that it can hit and bump into other things. So while the player is just a player, we're actually going to add some more child nodes to player to kind of like click together those Lego pieces. So on player, I'm going to press this little add child node button. And the first thing I want to look at is adding what's called a sprite 2D. And sprite is pretty much universal in game design, is the picture or the graphic that it goes along with a thing or an object. Now, if you've done something like Scratch in the past, this is a little bit confusing because sprites are actually like nodes, and what they appear like is called their costume. But if you haven't done Scratch in the past, don't worry. Just think of, for majority of game design, sprites are the images that a thing gets in your game. So I'm going to add this general purpose sprite node. And again, still we see nothing. Now, in this case, I don't need to name sprite because it's actually part of player. I could hide that away with that little arrow beside there if you want. And I'm going to add a bunch of nodes to make up player, but every object has a sprite, so you don't necessarily need to change the name. Um, but for the majority of your objects, they should all be named appropriately. Now, here we don't have a picture, I don't see it, but if I click on this sprite, over on the right-hand side, we have what's called our inspector. And our inspector allows us to change or tweak some of the properties of a node. And the number one here I've got is a texture. And a texture is the actual appearance of a sprite. It's the file that gets used. Again, you're going back to Scratch days in earlier grades. This would be like a costume. So I can bring a file in over here, and I could later on download pictures from the internet and get or draw something myself and do whatever we like. But to get going, we're going to try and get going quick. So right now, Godot gives me a little robot Godot head called icon. It's a little picture here. So I'm just going to drag that over onto the texture slot. And you'll see magically that appears just like so. Perfect. Now I still have that little warning there. I do have a picture now, but here's this little warning saying you still have no shape. So just because I can see something doesn't necessarily mean it knows where the boundary is. And maybe we don't want the boundary to be the edge of that picture. Maybe we want it to be inside or bigger than the picture or something like that. So I'm going to add another node to this because if I were to have this play in my game, it would be like a ghost. Things would just pass right through it because it didn't know where the edge of it was. So I am going to add a third node here, which is my collision shape 2D, a node that provides shape 2D and collision to the parent. So that's great. Again, now you can see that error is gone, but a new one has appeared and it says, oh, it needs to know what shape it should be. A shape resource must be provided. Again, same idea over here. I can see this shape is empty. So it doesn't know what shape it wants to be. And you've got some basic shapes that you can create. Lines, circles, pills, rectangles, even more complicated shapes later on. This is pretty generically a rectangle, so I'm going to make a new rectangle shape. And if I zoom in, you'll see there it is in slightly light blue. I can pull it over there for you. Here is the shape. And if you've done any gaming before, think of the shape as like the hitbox. This is where it's considered to be. So the solid area, if you will. So if I were to leave that right there, and this player were to, or something were to land on this player, it would go right through them unless it happened to land right here, which is kind of weird. So generally, you want to make sure that the shape lines up with the size of your picture. This is why I like to have my picture on first so that I can see where my shape is going to go. However, you could, if you wanted to, say I didn't want the edge to be able to be clickable or bumped into or something like that, I could make the shape a lot smaller, so only this is going to be the solid area of this picture. Or, similarly, if I made it bigger, this actually would be considered solid even though I didn't see it. Shapes in your game are going to be invisible, so this light blue is just so we can see kind of where the boundaries are. So there we go. We have now a shape. We've got a player. It's got a sprite. And it has a collision shape. So we now know where it's solid. And what I can do is I can save this scene by just right-clicking up there, or if I were trying to run my game, it would save as well. And it's going to remember grab the name of the root node. So I'm just going to save that like that. And if we wanted to, I could play this game by clicking that little clacker board, and we'll see that player up in the top corner just like that. So that's our first start. Now I have a level 1. This is where my game is actually going to be built. And now I've got a player as a separate scene. And then the nice thing about having scenes is that you can reuse them on different levels. So I've made player its own scene so that I can put player into level 1 and player into level 2 and player into level 3, and I don't have to keep making new players. I just have one in one spot and I can reuse it nicely. So how do I get player into my level 1? Well, let's go back to level 1 here, and level 1 is my root node. So normally I would click this to add another node to it, but I actually already have the node I want. I want that player to be put there. So right beside that add child node is something called an instantiate child scene. And this is ugly wording here, but bear with me. Instantiate a scene file as a node. So basically what you're saying is I want to take a scene file I've already made and bring it in as a node. And there's some real benefits to this. So if I just bring up a little paint here for you, we can see this very cool, very powerful computer programming concept. So imagine, if you will, I am a teacher, which I am, and I've made a test. Um, I've written a test, it's got 10 questions on it, and I'm just going to call this my original test, my OG test here. I've photocopied a copy for every student in my class, and then I hand out the copies to these students. I'm just going to do 3 here. Each one is a copy and it is the same, which is really, really handy and has saved me from having to write it manually out 3 times. The problem being is that you then get your copy of your test and you put your name on it, like so. Now that you've put your name on your test, it's your test. And here's the issue. I look at my test and I realize I've made a spelling mistake on one of the questions. And I need to get that spelling mistake fixed. The problem is you have your copies, they're yours. So the only way I have of fixing that is to get each one of you to go in and manually make that correction. And if there was 100 tests, that would be problematic. And maybe I've photocopied 1,000 tests because I'm going to give the same test out to every one of my classes. Now I have to go back through every one of those and either update each one and fix the spelling mistake, or I have to throw them all in the garbage and reprint them all. So that is the problem with what we call a copy. And there are better ways of doing things in the age of computing. In this case, we're going to create something called an instance. And an instance is very similar to a copy. However, it is linked back to the original. It knows where it came from and what it was supposed to look like. So with an instance, I can make a change to my original copy and all of the instances will immediately be updated with the new changes. Now that's not to say that everything will be exactly the same, just the changes that I made to the original. For instance, you've put your name 1, 2, and 3 on yours. That's not going to get updated or overwritten or anything like that, but the changes to things that were in the original will get pushed out to all of the copies immediately. And that is the power of having these ideas of a scene. So the player is its own scene, and I'm going to put an instance of it on level 1 so that it will be able to have players on level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And if I later on decide that I don't want this Godot head to be the graphic, I can make a change here to player and I can push it out and the player on level 1, 2, 3, and 4 will all get these updates. So that's a really cool, powerful idea here of Godot and this idea of instancing. So rather than adding a new child node, right beside that is a little link or a chain called instantiate or put an instance in of a child scene. So I'm going to click that there and you'll see up will come all of the scenes that I have in my game project. Right now I only have 2. I have level 1 and player. Now don't put a instance of level 1 inside level 1. That leads to some weird inception kind of details. So I'm going to put a copy or an instance of player one in there. And you will see immediately player one appears as such as a child. And there's a little scene here, little clackerboard icon, which indicates that this is a scene. And if I wanted to make a change to it or an edit to the original, I could click there and it will open up that scene file for me. In fact, I can close that and it will immediately open it up for me so that I could make changes to the original. So now I have got myself a level one scene and its only child is a player. I can then also grab that player and move it where I want. Um, so that if I were to play my game here, you've got my staring contest game here, the worst game you've ever played. I could sit there and stare, but I have made a real video game that actually runs and is not very interesting to play, but it is in fact a program that we could then sell on the App Store. I'm sure somebody would download staring contest game for 25 cents or less.